Restaurant employees of Reddit. What actually happens when someone doesn't have enough to pay the bill? Most you've ever seen. Story 1. I used to be a server and had this table with 4 guys. Their bill came up to somewhere around 52 and some change. I brought them the bill, and when I went to collect it, the guys were gone, and there was only 50 cash on the table. I told my manager, and he removed something from their bill and cashed it out so I would still get something for a tip. It was definitely a shoot thing for those guys to do, but thankfully I had a good manager that made sure it wouldn't come out of my pocket. Answer. Used to deliver pizzas and delivered to another restaurant. The guy who handed me the money, he counted it out in front of me and then handed it over. I should have recounted before I left because he must have snuck a bill back and left me 20 short. Went back to mine and realized what happened. The manager attempted to call, but they refused to answer the phone. He ended up adjusting the price as well. Not a great tip out of it, but at least it was something. Story 2. A table shorted me 30, left me 120 in cash on a 150 tab. Went to the manager asking what to do. He told me I could pay the difference to make the check whole, or they'd mark the shortage as a walkout and I'd get written up. I asked, what would have happened if they left me nothing and just walked out? Manager's response was, same 2 options. Since I wasn't going to pay the difference from my tips and was going to get written up anyway, I told him, my bad. They walked out on the A night tab. I'll take the write-up. Pocketed the 120 in cash and got written up. Answer. Chen Sheng was an officer serving the Qin dynasty, famous for their draconian punishments. He was supposed to lead his army to a rendezvous point, but he got delayed by heavy rains, and it became clear he was going to arrive late. The way I always hear the story told is this. Chen turns to his friend Wu Guang and asks, what's the penalty for being late? Passing, says Wu. And what's the penalty for rebellion? Passing, says Wu. Well then, says Chen Sheng. And thus began the famous Dazexiang uprising, which caused thousands of deaths and helped usher in a period of instability and chaos that resulted in the fall of the Qin dynasty 3 years later. Story 3. I realized I didn't have my wallet because I changed purses. I explained, apologized, and left my phone as collateral while I ran back to my apartment for my wallet. I then ran all the way back and, sweaty and gasping, found my waiter to pay. But when he went to swipe his card, the reader would not accept it. So we both kind of just looked back at each other with this blank face. Eventually it did go through though, haha. Story 4. In my experience, it depends on the situation. If someone ran out on a small check, we usually ended up doing nothing, but you'd be banned if you ever dared to show up again. Some customers would apologize and promise to come back and pay. We would generally just let them go, especially if they were a regular. More often than not, they did come back and pay. Even people who straight up refused to pay would generally just be banned. I remember my manager calling the police just once on someone trying to walk out after racking up a huge check and getting into a screaming argument with my manager when he tried to stop him. Answer. I was mortified when my debit card didn't work when I was like 18. I thought I'd be hauled off to jail. I swore I'd be back to pay. Went to the ATM. Debit still didn't work. I woke my mom up and begged her for money. All she had was a 100 she kept for emergencies. I ran back and dropped the 100 on what was a 20 check. Left an 80 tip. For about a year after that, they always gave me free soft drinks and occasionally comped an appetizer or other free food. It was a Denny's back in the 1990s. Story 5. I delivered for Domino's Pizza in the early 2000s. I took an order that went to an apartment complex on the edge of town. When I arrived, the front door was wide open. I knocked on the door and I heard a voice telling me to come in. I walked into the apartment and made my way to the living room. There was a man sitting on the ground. A wheelchair was on the other side of the room. I asked if he was okay, and he told me he had to sleep in the floor because he didn't have a bed. I looked around the apartment and noticed he had no furniture. He only had an overhead light and nothing else. I pulled his order out of the bag and told him the price. He then told me he had no money but hadn't eaten in a few days. I was new at the job and didn't know what the policy would be for something like this. I told him I couldn't give him his pizza and apologized over and over. He told me he understood and I left. When I got back to the store, I told the manager about what happened. He asked me if I wanted to give the guy the pizza. I told him I did, but I didn't want to get in trouble. He told me it was okay because he knew I believed the guy, and also because of the guy's living situation. The manager walked over to a computer and deleted the order. He then told me to grab a few cans of pop and some wings that were never picked up. He then told me We couldn't do this all the time, but there were times when it was the right thing to do, and I could make that decision the next time. I drove back over to the guy's house and knocked on the open door again. He told me to leave the door open because it helped keep the apartment cool. I was called into the apartment and saw the guy was still on the floor. He saw that I was still carrying his order and his face lit up. I told him I was bringing his food back along with some other things. He was so thankful. He told me this food would last him a week and asked me to put everything on the counter. The man then proceeded to thank me. I apologized and told him I wanted to help, but I didn't know if it was okay. We talked for a bit before I had to go back to work. The whole interaction made me sad. The guy was really nice, but handed a shoot card in life. He never ordered from us again, and I have no idea what happened to him. I wish I had checked on him at least one more time, but I didn't, and I kind of regret it. Answer: FWIW, your manager is a great human being, and more of us need to be like him. You had an opportunity to get a first-hand experience on being kind in the service industry, and I hope you turned out great as well. I used to work customer service in video game with in-app purchases, and I had no problem hooking customers up if they're cool and not backfire on me. In regards to checking in on him, that's not your job, and you shouldn't carry that burden. Let's just assume his rich uncle passed away and left him a bunch of inheritance. He was able to hire a help and improve his situation. If you went to check in on him and he's in a much worse position, that's just going to haunt you. You did that best you can, and that's good enough, mate. Story 6. We once had a family who racked up a $350 bill at a steakhouse, then realized they'd forgotten their wallet. The manager made one adult stay behind while the rest went to get it. They never came back. The guy sat there for 3 hours before admitting they ditched him too. Answer: I forgot my wallet at Morimoto's in Napa, was on a 4th or 5th date with my now wife, and made a good faith gesture to pay by calling Amex and asking if they could run my card without the card. I knew my card numbers. They didn't want to deal with that and just had us come back the next day. We tipped really well. Omakase was great, and a few years later, when at Morimoto's on Maui, they even looked up what the menu was and made sure we had no repeats. I was sure to have my wallet that time. Story 7. I used to deliver pizza in college. Never exactly saw this play out except one time. I showed up to the guy's house and he handed me a Ziploc bag full of change and said, "Sorry, this is all I have. It should be enough." I was not about to start counting it on his porch, so I gave him the pizzas. Went back to the restaurant and told my manager. He voided the sale and just put the change in the register. Answer: that reminds me of the time I was in college delivering pizzas. I pulled up to a hotel and these two guys came to the door with a handful of change. They were watching me as I opened my fanny pack with all my bills in it, and I thought they were thinking of robbing me, but I outweighed the two of them combined. I wonder how many pizzas they ordered, hoping for a short and skinny delivery person. Story 8. I own a few restaurants, so it depends. If someone walks out on the bill and it's small, I just write it off and go on with my day. If it's big, we file a police report. Nothing's ever come of those reports, as they're usually tourists from out of state anyways. And BTW making staff pay for it is both illegal and unethical, so we don't do that. A few times a customer has stated they can't pay, which has caused a bit of a negotiation. Once it was a clearly homeless man who just said he has no money and that was it. Told him, no biggie, he was just hungry, and off he went. Didn't see him again. Another was someone who rang up a whole tab drinking and decided to not give a shoot and flat out refused to pay. He looked more interested in starting a fight than getting out of his bill. The police came, and suddenly his wallet was out though. The most I've lost on a walkout was about 100. It's pretty rare in my area to have such problems. 90 of my problems are dealing with weirdos and crazies like the pretend health inspector we had come by. Also, side note, my bartender got swindled on a fake 100 one time. Was annoying, but I absorbed the cost and I retrained the staff on spotting them. Next day, the same guy shows up and says, did you guys get some funny money yesterday? I had a joke bill in my wallet and might have accidentally used it, so that was nice of him. Story 9. I'm not a restaurant employee, but I can tell you what happened to me at a Longhorn. Their machine declined my bank card, so I told the waitress I was going across the street to get cash from the ATM. My wife never left the table. The manager came out and informed my wife that the cops had been called and they were trespassing her from the property. So she got up and walked outside at their insistence. I got back at the same time the cops showed up. Explained to the cops what happened. The waitress was horrified by the manager's response. I was asked to never return and didn't pay a dime. Complained to Longhorn Corporate, and they sent me twice my bill and gift cards with an apology note. I have never been back. Story 10. I've only had this happen maybe 3 times in my 25 years in the industry. 2 were regulars, and they made it good later and made sure to leave extra for the servers. Or they'd call ahead and warn you that this fudge was on the way to your place, and we just wouldn't serve them. Answer: I've never worked in a bar, but last year I witnessed something similar to your last paragraph with bars calling other bars about customers, but in a good way, LOL. Was in a small town for a wedding, and once the party was over, a bunch of us walked into town hoping to go to the one well-rated bar we found. Place was too packed, so they pointed us to some more dive bar a few blocks away. By the time we got there, apparently someone at the first bar had called this bar and told them a well-dressed wedding party was on the way, so they were already super welcoming and ready for us once we got there. LOL. Story 11. My family and I accidentally walked out on luck one time after eating at a restaurant we had been to several times before. It was a smaller family-type place, and my mom realized we hadn't paid while we were still out later that day. We rushed there, and apparently the woman who worked the register was very confident we would be back, while someone who worked in the back was worried we wouldn't. We did indeed go back and pay. LOL, no harm, no foul. We all laughed about it. Answer: reminds me of the couple times I forgot I had something on the bottom rack underneath the main part of the shopping cart, like a case of pop. I'd pay and forget about the case, walk out, get to my car and load up, and then notice I didn't pay for that item. So I'd go back in with the cart back to the aisle I checked out in and tell them, hey, me again. I forgot I had this and didn't pay and then pay for it. I figure going back to the same teller was important since they're supposed to be checking for that stuff in the first place. And if for some reason it did get reported for theft, they might get in trouble for not checking. Story 12. This happened with my dad. He was ordering food at a drive-thru in a storm, and the electricity shut off as a transformer got hit by lightning. Dad waited in the drive-thru for a few minutes, as the manager told him the generator usually kicks on, and he can pay with card. He drove next door to a grocery store, took cash out, and drove back with the cash in hand. 20 order turned into 40 for the drive-thru workers as a tip. He became a priority customer after that one. Story 13. When I was a fast food manager, if your card declined or you actually told us you forgot your money, and if your order was less than 8, I would comp the meal and ask that they call the survey line for the store instead. Pretty against the hotline policy. Not supposed to bribe, but you literally didn't have to, and I had no way of knowing if you did or not. Just a way to build positive relationships with the customers and help the store numbers. Story 14. My tipsy jerk lost my wallet and didn't realize until after ordering shawarma. I said, oh dang, my bad, I lost my money. Dude was like, nah, the order's already in, just take it, but promise to come back, not to repay, just to have more food. I went there for 10 years after that, and the food was consistently fire. Never forgot my wallet again. I swear they made me a customer for life just by letting a tipsy lady eat shawarma at 1 a.m. long. Story 15. My wife and I went out to Red Lobster about 15 years ago, when it was still pretty decent. When the waiter brought our bill, I realized I didn't have my wallet on me. At the time, my wife didn't carry her money if I was with her, and it was before you could pay with a phone. I apologized, and my wife went home to get our money. Roughly 30 to 40-minute drive round trip. It just so happens that this was endless shrimp season. The waiter kept bringing shrimp out about every 5 minutes, and even though I told him not to, he kept delivering. I was so stuffed, but I didn't want to waste it. He got a big tip. To this day, that was the best service I ever received in a restaurant. Story 16. I was a customer once, went out to eat and definitely thought I had enough for the bill and a decent tip. I didn't, and I was all cash back then. No card to fall back on. I was horrified. Told the server I was short. She was so nice. Said I didn't have to tip. I was like, I don't even have enough for the bill. She was still cool. I said, it'd be right back. Not sure she believed me, but I went home and grabbed the emergency cash and went right back. Settled up and gave her a great tip. She ribbed me a few times when I went back, but it was all in fun. And Story 17. When I was a kid, I would buy Game Pro magazine every month at the corner store in the morning on the way to school. I would always bring exact change. One month they increased the price and I didn't notice. I was short 25 cents at checkout. The cashier let me take the magazine and told me I could come back later with the rest of the money. I went back with the 25 cents that day immediately after school. It was a very minor thing, but this small kindness became a core childhood memory. Story 18. A lady and her 4 kids walked into our pizza salad bar place. She had bruises all over her arms and the kids looked scared. She asked me what she could get for 10 just to feed her kids. I paid for them to have unlimited salad bar out of my pocket, asked the kids what their fave pizza was, and went in the back and made it for them. She kept apologizing for how loud her kids were and asked how long she could be there. The kids weren't loud at all. They all just seemed scared. When I brought the pizza out for the kids, I told her I wanted to show her something at the salad bar she might like. And once out of earshot of the kids, I asked if she was okay or in danger or needed to call anyone. She just started crying and thanked me. Her mom was going to pick them out, but they're some distance away. She asked if she could hug me, and I said yes because she needed it. I'm a woman who dislikes being touched, but I understand that some people need hugs. I never saw her again, and I just hope she got away from whoever was hurting her. Story 19. When I was a teenager, I worked at a sandwich shop that was cash only. We were across the street from a bank, so the few times customers were short, they'd usually run to the bank and come back with cash. I only had one customer that told me they'd come back with cash and didn't. This person happened to be an instructor at a film camp that I was a part of. I thought I knew her pretty well and was shocked that she didn't return with cash. At the end of my shift, I had to explain why the till was short. Not a great moment for me. Story 20. Okay, this is going to take a bit. This all happened in 1988, so I was in jail for a short time for something minor, just a weekend stay. Anyways, I heard on the TV in the day room that the police had been called last night because someone was up in a tree with a fork. A fork? The next night, I had a new guy in my cell, and it was the guy with the fork. So he tells me the rest of the story. So he went into this pizza pasta place intending to dine and dash. He was eating pizza and drinking and was getting pretty tipsy. The manager comes over and says they wouldn't serve him anymore, and he had to pay and leave. So Buddy jumps up and grabs the waitress and a fork off the table. I guess the knife was too far away to get. He holds the fork at the girl's neck and backs out of the restaurant. Once outside, he lets the girl go and starts running up the road. The manager is running next to the guy and tells him that he, the manager, ran marathons on the weekend, and Buddy wasn't going to get away. So Buddy decides to climb a tree to get away from the manager. He still has the fork and is threatening the manager with it. The cops come and surround the tree and tell Buddy to come down and drop the fork. Buddy says, "Fudge you, go ahead and shoot me." BTW, this is in Canada, so the cops don't shoot him. Finally, he gets tired of hanging from the tree and comes down. They put him in remand for the rest of the weekend, which is where I got the story from him. Story 21. I work at a local pizza place, and one time a woman came in with a card we didn't take. She ran out to her car, but she didn't have another form of payment. My manager just gave it to her since it only cost $10. She actually came in a few months later again, this time having a form of payment we take, and she actually paid for it. Was pretty cool. Story 22. I wasn't the restaurant employee in this situation, but during college, I worked 2 jobs and lived with my parents. On their wedding anniversary, I wanted to surprise them with their favorite meals from a local restaurant. My dad loved seafood, so I ordered him a lobster tail dinner that was listed at market price. I've never ordered lobster before, and I didn't know what market price meant. I went to the restaurant to pick it up, but I didn't have enough money to pay for it. I didn't know what to do, so I offered the hostess all of my money, which was around $40. She didn't know what to do either, and she went in the back to get the manager. I was a nervous wreck and started crying. The manager came out and I explained to him what happened. He ended up taking my money and letting me keep the food. I felt horrible after. I was such an idiot. Story 23. Other side of this. There's a Mexican restaurant I frequent. Like, these people know my order when they see me. I once genuinely forgot my wallet after a long day, and the bartender suspended my order after I found out they couldn't do Apple Pay. He said, "Don't worry about, they know me," etc. Next day, I showed up the minute they opened and made the bill right with a 50 tip. Story 24. I was in a not-so-great time of my life, and I went to Wendy's for lunch one day. When I dug into my purse for my card, it was gone. I apologized to the workers and took my purse to a table and turned it inside out, but it was nowhere to be found. I was so embarrassed, and it really was a last straw. I went back to the counter and apologized again, sobbing, and told them to cancel the order. It seemed like the whole crew gathered and said they paid for my order. Then I cried harder, lol. Those people really restored my faith in humanity that day. I hope they all have wonderful lives. Story 25. Went to a food cart. They didn't take cards. We said, "Sorry, we'll be back another time. You paid when you ordered." The guy was like, "No problem," and insisted we take the food. Went to an ATM and went straight back. Gave him double the cost of the food and said, "Thanks so much." Great food and incredible customer service. Story 26. I had the opposite happen. The waiter walked out on me. We were at a cheap Italian restaurant, eating on the patio. We got there early, so one waiter was covering the entire patio. But after he served us our food and wine, a second waiter came on and covered our part of the patio. We finished and asked for the check. The waiter now covering us said that it wasn't his table. We said that the other waiter served us, and could that waiter give us the bill? The original waiter also claimed that he wasn't our server. Finally, we got tired of waiting for people to figure it out, so we tried to recall the prices of what we ordered, added $25 to cover tip and tax, and left the cash on the table. Story 27. The manager comes out and tries to work something out. They will try and get you to call someone who can give payment over the phone. If you can't do that, they'll try and hold something collateral, like your ID, to get you to come in tomorrow and pay. I've never seen them call the cops, and having you wash dishes is all Hollywood. Besides it taking too long to train you, it's in violation of 1,000,000 labor laws and OSHA laws. If they truly cannot get a payment, they comp the meal and ban you from returning. My expertise is a low-mid casual dining. Answer. I was a waiter years ago. Dude had a $25 bill and said he only had $20. I offered to get the manager to see if he would work something out. Manager comes out and the customer just lays into me. I was slow getting his order. He waited an hour for his food. It was the wrong food. I was rude about the bill. I overcharged him. Manager comped his meal and also told me I would only be getting shoot shifts for a month. The dude left a $100 bill as a tip on his comped bill. To this day, I have no fudge clue what that dude's deal was. Story 28. I have had to have a friend pay for my meal occasionally, and I get them next time. Once I ordered at Subway, and when it came time to pay, I realized I had forgotten my wallet. I lived in a small town, so I just ran home and got it and was able to pay. NBD. They knew me and where I lived, lol. Story 29. Couple years ago, I was working as a waiter at a sushi restaurant. Occasionally, we had company conference at the hotel across the street, and we would get flooded with people at lunch and dinner. One night, a group of 5-6 people attending a conference in town came over to dine. They ordered like 300 worth of food, and I was the only one waiting their table. They were nice and very professional. Then, I took my eyes off for 1 minute, and they left without paying. I took the bill and ran over to the hotel lobby and hope I could catch one of them, but it was in vain. None of the hotel staff know who I was trying to find. I didn't even have a name. I was so afraid of having to pay the bill out of my own pocket. I was still in college, and it's worth like 3 shifts of work. I came back to the restaurant, stood by their table, and just stared into space. The other customers asked me what's wrong, and I told them a group left without paying and IDK what to do. The owner kept the bill open and didn't make me pay for it. Turns out the customer that asked me what's wrong found one of the guys at that table. Next day, he came over to pay and apologized. Story 30. One of my coworkers had a couple who literally ran out on a busy night, and my coworker ran after them and tried to knock on their car window, but they just drove off and almost ran her over. The table was only like $71, and the owner knew it wasn't her fault after watching the cameras and just let her void the check. And she proceeded to blast their photos all over local Facebook groups. It was a fairly small town, and someone told us they were at the Airbnb next to her house. We called the cops, and they got arrested and fined like $500 each. So always pay your tabs because they might come after you. Story 31. I've seen Dine and Dashers bounce on a 100 bill. License plate taken and cops called. No idea what happened. When I was a GM at a pizza place, sometimes kids or regulars might come in and be a little, so I'd adjust the specials to make it work. Depending on who it was, I might add a note on their account. If it was someone I'd never seen or with a note indicating habitual, then I'd just tell them sorry and the crew would eat it. In the sit-down restaurant, we'd get a manager, and it would depend on the manager as to what they do. Generally, it's trying to give some special or a discount to knock the price down. If they had absolutely no money, then they might take something of value as a deposit or have one party member stay while the other went to get money. It was before smartphones were a thing, but phones and pages existed. Those were often the items. Story 32. My boyfriend and I walked out on a shisha bar one time. We both thought the other had paid at the start, so we walked out waving, "Thank you," and "Good night" to confused faces. Went back the next day and they said, "Don't worry about it," which was so nice. We felt so guilty. Story 33. Back when I was a barista, there was plenty of flexibility. If you were apologetic, I'd absolutely comp your order. If you were rude, sorry, policy requires payment. I had one gentleman come through the drive-thru and showed me his phone died, so he couldn't use the app gift card to pay for his drink. He wasn't necessarily rude, but shrugged and expected me to do something about it. Nope. I'm not taking responsibility for your dead phone. That's on you. He didn't want to use another method of payment, so I gave him the free cup of water he ordered and maintained eye contact while dumping his drink in the sink. For anyone else, I would have absolutely handed them their entire order and just voided it in the computer, applied a discount to make it free. At least apologize and ask if you can pay next time, and then I'd tell you not to worry about it. It's on us this time. But expecting a free drink, I won't entertain that. Story 34. I worked back of the house when I worked restaurants, but when I delivered pizzas, I had a few times I get to a house and the customer wasn't fully aware of the total cost of the order and would start panicking. It happened with a few stressed parents, different orders and addresses, and an elderly caretaker. And each time I told them, don't worry about it, and to keep their money, I'll cover it. I was by no means in a stable financial situation, but in that moment, I had the funds to pay it forward. You never know what someone is going through and how much something trivial to you can mean to them. Story 35. My manager did the coolest thing last week in this situation. My tables card was expired, so they tried 2 different cards with me, and they both came back declined. They spent 30 mins after getting the check figuring out a card to use. They only had the cards on their phone, or how to get the money into their accounts. I told my manager, I don't think they're going to walk out because they've been spending 30 minutes trying to figure this out, and she went over and offered to cover their bill. She just said things happen and call it good karma. And my manager gave me what would have been 20 of the check in cash, so I didn't lose out on a tip for her generosity. She's never done that before, so it's not a regular thing. The check was $35 for 2 of them. Story 36. I was working a job out of state with 5 or so guys. We went to lunch at this nice deli. They were having trouble with the register, so they told us to pay before we left. We went outside and ate, shot the breeze a while, and then left. I was thinking that night and didn't remember paying. Hit up the guys on the group chat. Did we forget to pay today? So the next day we went back to the same place for lunch, and they had forgotten also. So we all just ordered the same thing as the day before and paid twice. They seemed shocked we had come back. They loaded us up on our sandwiches and gave us free cookies. Story 37. I was about 16, working at a Subway in the downtown area of my town, and a business-looking man didn't have his wallet at checkout. He made big to-do about it, and I said, don't worry, I'll cover it, and pulled out my own wallet and paid for his meal. He was incredibly embarrassed, as he should be, and said he would be back the next day to pay me back. I was not expecting it, but he did come back and gave me extra for the trouble. Story 38. Can't believe no one has made a joke about getting a summons to the food court yet. Anyway, I forgot my wallet at home on a day trip to a nearby city, 2.5 hours away. Had never been there in my life. Didn't realize I didn't have my wallet for the entire drive. No license, no cards, no cash. Was visiting an out-of-town project I was managing. Lunch tab was about 45. Felt horrible and was mortified. Asked the server to bring the manager over. Handed them my business card. Explained what happened. Said I'd return next week. Take care of my bill. Same day of the week, the following week. Handed the manager a 50 and the server a 50 and apologized profusely. Place became my go-to lunch spot when visiting that project for the next year. When I paid the manager, he asked if I wanted my business card back. I explained that I didn't need it, but he could pin it on the wall for a good story. Story 39. I delivered pizza for a number of years, and one of the local town tipsy came in and said, I'd like to order a pizza for delivery, and me. He said his wallet was at his house, so I asked who wanted to take him, and the risk of getting stiffed. One of my friends, built like a linebacker, agreed to take him. When they got there, the tipsy said, I'll take the pizza in and grab my wallet. My friend said, no way, and that he should get the wallet first. The tipsy pauses for a moment, then says, I'll fight you for it. My friend agrees. The guy screams, no, and sprints into his house, pizzaless. So in answer to your question, nothing happened, and we ate his pizza that night. Story 40. I used to be a delivery driver. One time I had a delivery to a stripper. I get to the club. The bouncer lets me through. The stripper gives me cash and I leave. It was only after I got back to my car that I realized that she shorted me by like $5. I laughed it off. I was too distracted by all the titties. Story 41. Not an employee, but we were poor when I was a kid, but but my mom still wanted to treat me and my sister. If you've gone through my history, you'll also find during my childhood she fought a glioblastoma, the mother fudge of brain tumors. Anyway, we don't have a lot, but my mom takes us to McDonald's or I forget which. We go inside to eat and order, and my mom just gets us whatever. I honestly forget. I do remember my mom never ordering. Me and my sister always brought it up and she'd just be like, "It's fine, baby. I might have a fry or two." The kid behind the counter understood something that I didn't. We get our food and sit down, and after a few minutes, the fellow comes over and says something like, "Hey guys, someone just canceled their drive-through order. Would you like to have it?" Mom obviously said no thank you, and he said, "Well, I don't want to throw it away, so if you all really don't want it now, then have it later, or you can throw it away. Just don't do it here," and laughed, making the joke about, "I worked so hard, someone must eat my masterpiece." My mom did end up eating it. As an adult, when I worked in service, unless they were obviously fudge around, I would literally just comp whatever they didn't have money for. Made my days easier. I don't care if you dine and dash. I ain't paying for your food. Edit. It shouldn't matter, but I feel like we are at such fudge odds with one another, it is worth mentioning the races involved. We were white, and the gentleman, and my personal hero, was a young African-American teen. We were probably just a blip in his life and insignificant. He's just a good man. I've never forgotten his kindness, or the many times we got extras. Story 42. I volunteered at a bookstore. A young woman had a pile of books and had forgotten her wallet, asked us to hold them for her, and she'd come back the next day to pay for and pick them up. An older customer asked, "How much for all those books?" "Around 25, she said. They chatted for a bit, and he said he'd pay for it. Turns out he was a professor and just loved young people who read. Story 43. I worked at a diner in college. My pay was 5 hours. I often worked the mid-afternoon shift, so if I was lucky, I would go home with 40, including my salary. One afternoon, the diner was empty. I was replacing the ice in the pop machine, filling some salt shakers, chatting with the line cooks. Typical. A woman comes in, clearly disheveled, shaken. She orders the cheapest thing on the menu, a grilled cheese or tuna sandwich, maybe a pop. Time comes to pay the bill and she's hunting through her purse, swears she had a 20 on her. She said, "I must have left my card at home. Can I leave you my license as collateral?" I said, "Please, it's on me." As someone who was making 5 HR, and I felt bad for her, I knew I was lucky. Worst part is, that comes out of my check, not the restaurant's. So I worked 2.5 hours for free to make sure she could eat, and I'm still proud of that, to this day. Story 44. I accidentally walked out on a bar tab at a bar I went to somewhat regularly, but the bartender was new and didn't know me. Went back the next day to pay when I realized what I had done. The manager told me that they stopped the bartender from calling the police because they knew I would make it right. I gave the bartender a 100 tip as an apology. Edit. I gave the tip to the manager, not the bartender that wanted to call the police on a 50 tab. Story 45. I took a couple of friends out for dinner one night. We were celebrating, and I was paying. We went somewhere nice, and it was not cheap. The bill comes. I get my wallet and find it empty. No driver's license, no cash, no credit cards, nothing. Completely empty. Once I finished panicking, I spoke with the manager. He let us leave with nothing more than my signature, promising to come back with cash. Got home, yelled at my husband. Was not his fault, he was just handy. Took his card to the ATM and ended up tipping 50 on a 100 bill. This was some years ago. Later discovered, my coworker had helped himself to my wallet as a prank. Story 46. I've had a few occasions that were 150, and it was during a time, 2009 to 2015-ish, when the server was expected to pay out of pocket. This meant that I would walk with basically nothing at the end of the night. For a full 10 hours of work, one time a guy tried to walk out on the bartender, so I went after him out the door to tell him to pay his tab. Dude was crazy. He saluted in the middle of the empty street while I was talking to him, quickly walked back towards me to the door, and poked me with his keys in my back. I don't remember if he paid. Turns out it was a single youngling draft, and when I lifted my shirt, I quickly realized he didn't poke me with keys. It was a small Swiss Army knife that he hit me with. It was not even close to a serious injury, but still. My boss asked, "Why are servers chasing after people not paying for tabs like that?" "Well, dude, 'cause you make us pay it, and I didn't know how big or small the tab was until later." I now own a restaurant, and am well aware that the practice of making your employees pay for walkouts is both illegal and a recipe for disaster, especially in certain edge cases. We always get a card on file, physically or in the POS, unless it's irregular to a degree that we know where they live. It sucks, but the employer has to eat it and implement better safeguards. Securing payment channels should be on the employer and dummy-proof on the employee side. No one should have to come to a job that demanding for long hours through the night and then roll the dice on whether or not they make a living. Story 47. We had an older gentleman come in late one night. We knew something was up when arrived as he had a head wound that appeared to still be fresh, and he denied any form of assistance with it. He also sent back 3 different kinds of service bread to begin his meal. At the end, he claimed he had no way to pay and claimed he had informed us of this when he sat down. He, of course, did not. We tried briefly to reason with him, but eventually called the non-emergency line as he had run up a 400 tab. They informed us it was, in fact, an emergency, and we dialed 911 and had police on the scene in about 20 minutes. They spoke with the man for a few minutes until a social worker arrived, as it was clear the man was in crisis. They convinced him to leave the restaurant in an ambulance, and we did a house comp, which means we essentially ate the cost of his check. Story 48. This was like 1985, and Jambalayas on Burnett was the fanciest place I'd ever taken a date. We were 19. My card got declined. The server and manager were both super cool. I told them I'd bring by the next day. I did, and that was our fancy place until it closed. We are still married. Story 49. This was clearly a stash house. She tried to pay with a check. We didn't take checks, and then asked how to spell 11. I stepped outside and called my boss and said, "This one is on the house." Left the food, took the check, and bounced. Got back to the shop and explained the situation. Boss understood and ripped up the check. Sometimes 50 just ain't worth it. Story 50. Not an employee, but ate at a small local sub shop outside Boston once. Didn't realize it was cash or check only and no card, and didn't have any cash on me. I offered to walk back to my place and grab a check, but they said to not worry about it and pay later. Went back there a few weeks to eat again and paid for the other sandwich. The guy had forgotten about it, but I didn't want to not pay for the other meal. Story 51. Wasn't a restaurant, but a grocery store. I watched the self-service checkout, and one evening some teen girls came in to buy some really basic stuff. Bread, jam, a frozen pizza, and a carton of orange juice. Well, the card they have wasn't working, so they sat to the side to call someone to figure it out. I just walked over and paid the 20. They were really embarrassed and shocked that I would pay, but very thankful. Story 52. There was a 12-top. 8 were high school kids. They ate like they were dying of starvation, and then the kids left. Then one of the adults left. So there were 3 adults left who said they weren't paying all the bills, that they had one kid there for dinner, but the others were their kids' friends. They weren't going to pay? Our manager said, "Call them back. They need to pay." And they again said, "We don't know them." And our manager said, "Well, your kid knows them, so you'd better get them all back to pay the bills or we are calling the police." The bills in total were something around $600 or $700. The 3 adults that were left ended up splitting it all. Absolutely wild. Story 53. I've got a great story about this. I owned a small steakhouse on Nantucket about 20 years ago. The island is known for its extremely wealthy summer residents and visitors. One night, a large family of about 10 people came in for dinner. They were awful. The young kinds were running around causing trouble. The parents were entitled and messy, and the patriarch of the family, sitting at the head of the table, was a self-righteous twat that looked and acted just like Judge Elishu Smales. The bill comes to the table, and everyone very quickly shuffles out and into their cars and cabs, except the patriarch. He's casually waiting behind holding on to the check. After everyone else leaves, he casually saunters over to me at the bar and nonchalantly says, "I forgot my wallet. I'll swing by next week to take care of this." "Excuse me, sir, are you unable to pay your bill?" My response made him super irritated, and he angrily quipped back, "I can obviously pay my bill. I'm on a 100-foot yacht in the harbor. Of course I can pay for dinner. How dare you speak to me like that? Where is the owner?" "I am the owner," I quickly responded, "and I don't know who you are or where you're from. You're paying the bill or we have to call the police. Do you understand?" He started fumbling a bit with the ums and ahs, saying that the police wouldn't be necessary, and he's obviously good for it. And just at that moment, my quick-witted bartender appeared behind me and coolly suggested, "Why don't you leave that Rolex as collateral? I'm sure that would cover the cost of your meal." The sudden look of defeat on this man's face was wild. Like he was really thinking he was going to get away with a free 1,000 meal for 10 people. He called his wife, who came back to the restaurant in a cab about 15 minutes later. He spread the bill over 2 credit cards. Story 54. Customer here, but my coworker once walked on a 5-figure bar tab. Our company got bought out, and the new owner's rules barred paying for adult beverage. So what they did for parties was a bit weird. After that, whichever sales weasel was getting the biggest bonus had it inflated specifically to cover the tab at that quarter's party. Anyway, the winning weasel goes to pay at like midnight, and his Amex is declined with an error for something like $15K. So was his wife's. They make some calls, the cards are fine, they try again. Nada. It's been like a half hour. Everyone else is long gone. No one is answering their cell phone, and he's only got the one card and $300 cash. The manager finally makes the decision to call the owner and ask what he wants to happen. Well, turns out the owner had made changes with their payment processor the week before, dropped Amex, and then didn't tell anyone. So they let him walk, and he came back in the morning with cash. Story 55. Not a restaurant, but my dad used to manage a petrol station. In South Africa, the petrol attendant pumps your petrol for you, and you generally pay after they pump the petrol diesel. There were many times where people couldn't pay or forgot wallets or whatever. And this was like 0506, so no cards on your phone, etc. And so people would pay with sunglasses, watches, not crazy valuable. Basically anything of value in the car, or on more than one occasion, a digital camera. Most times the people would come back the next day and pay the bill and get their things back. But half the time they didn't bother, or they weren't from the town. So my dad paid the petrol difference and kept the items. This is how we got our first family camera. Story 56. I used to manage a pizza store. Sometimes when I rang up a customer's card, they wouldn't have enough on it to pay. I always just accepted what they had and never told them the difference because I know a lot of them were struggling with money. We also had a community special where anyone could come in and ask for a large cheese and they'd get one for free, no questions asked. When the pizza business was sold to a new owner, that was the one request I made, for the new owner-manager to keep the community special going. I really hope they still are. One of my favorite things about the pizza place was feeding people. I miss it every day. Story 57. Not an employee, but there was a time when I tried to treat a couple of, now ex, friends out to dinner, but told them I was extremely limited on cash. One friend understood and ordered light, while the other ordered something more pricey and mentioned they'd help if needed. When it actually came time to pay, said friend dipped out and went home to avoid helping while I was left struggling. The waitress who served us eventually told me not to worry about the rest of the change, that she would use some of her tip money, and we mentioned to the manager what happened. The next time I went back, I had given her back the money she used to help pay my bill and thanked her sincerely. Story 58. Years ago, I used to work the kitchen at a bar called Chilkoot Charlie's. One night, some douche reached over the counter and grabbed a whole meal. And when I turned around and noticed what he'd done, he laughed in my face and asked what I was going to do about it, while gesturing to his 2 or 3 buddies. There are 2 things I don't think he counted on. 1, the bouncers at Coots in those days did not fudge around. 2, I fed the bouncers for free. He got bounced out that night and was given the choice to either pay up, including a tip, or his getting bounced would be a permanent 86. He paid willingly, and his buddies were pissed that he had gotten them all kicked out. Never saw him again. Story 59. I was getting Qdoba in college and realized I left my wallet in a computer lab, which was mortifying. The checkout guy said, "It's fine. You can keep the burrito." And I was so surprised and thankful that after I got my wallet, I went back, like a 15M bus ride, and paid for it and tried to give him a tip for being nice, but he just had me put it in the tip jar. I was so hungry and stressed. That guy did a small thing to make my night a little less stressful. Thanks, Qdoba guy. Story 60. I used to eat Brahms daily in high school. It was my autistic safe meal. Double bacon cheeseburger. Nothing else. I didn't have money once, and they told me I could just pay it next time I came in, because they knew it'd come back. I did come back, and I did pay. I miss Brahms. Story 61. I don't work in the restaurant industry, but do work in hospitality. We had a client walk out on a $5,000 charge. She merely called her credit card company and said we never provide the service. The company canceled the charge and ain't shoot we can do about it. We have text messages and video 100 proving we provided the service, but company is not interested in our side of the story. Story 62. I was once on the other side. I had dinner at a restaurant and couldn't pay. Not because I didn't have money, but for some reason that day my bank app and card didn't work, so I couldn't pay. The owner just gave me the restaurant account details and asked me to make a transfer later. Story 63. Used to work at a mid-range restaurant in a touristy area. Once had a guy try to pay a $150 bill with a Blockbuster gift card. When I told him we couldn't accept that, he said, well, it's vintage. That should count for something. If someone genuinely forgets their wallet or card, we usually take an ID and have them fill out a form. Most of the time, they actually come back or send money. People aren't always awful, just sometimes. Craziest one? A table of 6 ran up a $600 bill with drinks, apps, steaks, desserts. The whole works, then just dashed. One guy slipped on the way out and dropped his phone. We called his mom. Story 64. I work in an expensive restaurant. I had 2 guys waiting for a third guy they wanted to hire for some kind of tech job. The third guy shows up and asked for the wine menu, looked at the French wine, and asked the other 2 guys if First Crew was okay with them. They didn't know what he was talking about, and I could clearly see that as they shrugged and said, sure. Tech guy asks me about a $3,400 bottle. I told him it was great, but I think he'd be happy with another that was $2,700, just to have some pity on the 2 poor bastards that were going to be stuck with this bill. Tech guy drinks some wine. Other 2 guys are impressed with the wine as well. Tech guy doesn't eat, boxes up his food he ordered, as well as ordering food to go for his kid and leaves. 2 guys get their bill for like $3,500 and shoot themselves. Can't pay it, and it's too late to authorize a larger purchase with their corporate bookkeeper. They couldn't pay but left their passports and other random shoot as collateral and came back the next day and paid. Story 65. We used to have these 2 dudes come in. They'd be in every night for weeks, and we wouldn't see them for a month, and they'd be back. They worked for the power company. One time they came in and realized they left their credit card at the hotel, and they only had enough cash to taxi back to the hotel. The waitress told them she'd cover their bill, and they promised they'd be back the next day. They'd order a couple burgers and beer, so she used her tips from that night to pay. They came in the next night, and it was her night off. The owner happened to be in, and for some reason he got pissed off that the waitress covered their bill. He called her up and fired her. Mind you, he got paid for their order. I felt so bad for her because she was helping out regular good customers of ours. Another time we had a couple of kids in, and they were so polite and literally counting change before they ordered to make sure they'd have enough to leave a tip. We may have messed up an order of fries and gave them free soda because all they could afford was 2 side salads and water. They were the nicest kids, so it was worth it. Story 66. Several years back, I was bartending and a guest gave me their card for the running tab. He was sitting at the bar the whole time, and our POS didn't have the option to swipe and pre-authorize the card, so we'd just keep them in a cup with an updated receipt. The guy took 2 or 3 smoke breaks throughout his stay. On his last one, he never came back. After a bit, I went to take payment for his tab and realized he had left me one of those fake cards credit card companies send in the mail with credit card offers. I wasn't even mad, LOL. Ended up just getting check voided, and the whole staff learned a new walking out on a tab strategy to look out for. Story 67. I work fast food. My coworker took the order, and when they got to me, they said they forgot their money. Normally, they tell us they either go or go hoke to get their wallet and come back. This lady still wanted her coffee. I told her she had to pay, called me a name, then left. She came back 10 minutes later meanie about what I did to the order taker. We normally just give the food and collect the money later for our good regulars. She was neither. But it was a small town, so my coworker, over the speaker, called her out by name, told her to stop her crap and complaining and to go to Wendy's or anywhere else since we won't be serving her today. Story 68. Not a restaurant employee, but I wasn't able to pay once. I took my girlfriend out for sushi to celebrate my first big paycheck. My card declined. After swiping, tapping, and jiggling my card a few times with no luck, I left my girlfriend there and ran to the other side of this huge shopping center, to the ATM machines, tried to draw money for over 20 minutes, but it wouldn't let me. Turns out my bank blocked me from using my money till I could prove where it came from. Never heard of that before or since. I made my way back to the sushi place, asked for a manager. Owner came out, explained the situation to him, and he said, "Don't worry about it. We've got it this time. Next time you come back, just give your waiter a big tip." Story 69. I once took my family to a Chinese restaurant and realized I'd forgotten my wallet. It was awkward at first because there was a bit of a language barrier, but they understood when I indicated I would be leaving my kid brother as collateral. Story 70. I used to manage a sit-down restaurant in a mall. I always kept an extra eye on tables of kids without adults, and I would have my host seat them at the back of the store so they couldn't hit the door as easily as being near the entrance. So one weekend, 4 teenagers were sat at a table. They ate apps, entrees, and desserts. My entire staff was eyeballing them by dessert. You could just feel it. They were going to dine and dash. They got their bill and all their heads were on swivels, and no one was pulling out money. Then they decided to take turns going to the bathroom to look for escape routes. Anyway, we actually had cops on foot in our mall, and we had a phone number we could call to request officers on site, which I had done by the time they got their bill. And man, oh man, when those cops showed up, all their faces dropped. I asked one of the cops to come with me while I waited tableside for them to pay. Turns out I was right. None of them had money. They all had to take turns using our store phone. This was before most people had cells, let alone kids, to call parents who could come pay the tab, and the cops kept the kids in our waiting area until someone arrived and ponied up the cash. That was one pissed-off dad who showed up. He gave the server who waited on them a fat jerk tip, apologized profusely to us, made all the kids apologize. I was just glad I didn't have to comp the 125-ish tab. I never made my servers pay for other people being shitheads. Anyway, just one of my many memories from back in the day. Story 71. I had two customers come in that had their own system for carrying money. The first person only carried the change, while the second only carried the bills. They always wanted to pay in exact change as well. So one day, when they didn't have enough change to make it exact, but enough bills to actually cover the total, they just started subtracting things from the order. Story 72. When I was a kid, my dad and I would go out to a local restaurant for soup or ice cream, depending on the weather. Once he forgot his wallet at home and offered to leave me there for collateral while he drove home to get his wallet. The cashier didn't bother to hold back their laughter and said they knew us and trusted him. My dad had been going there for about 20 years at that point, and I had been coming since I was born, so it wasn't a surprise. But my dad was super embarrassed, and I guess didn't know what else to offer to do. We went home. He paid the bill in full, and knowing my dad, he tipped the cashier a ridiculous amount. Story 73. When I worked at Subway, people would try to just yank the sandwiches off the counter and walk away without paying. So we'd always keep a hand on the subs in order to prevent them from being yanked and to crush them if the customer decided to follow through with yanking. They'd also try the whole, "Oh, I'll be back in 5, I just need my wallet," and try to take the sub with them. No, you won't be taking that. We will hold it for you. Magically, they'd have their wallets or the money. Also had some dude who drove a super fancy BMW try to dig in my tip jar for money to pay for his massive meal. Guy got real mad when I quite literally ripped it out of his hands and told him to fork over what he'd removed already, pay for his meal with his money, or I'd calls the cops. I didn't close at that store again, but the guy was a frequent flyer. We'd yell, "Hide the tip jar," if he came in. I think he eventually got banned. Subway was wild. Story 74. I had someone leave cash on the table and leave. Super common. It was a very busy restaurant. His bill was something over 50, like 58 maybe. I went to collect my book and there was a 20 and whatever else the amount was. But he left his phone on.